My mom kicked me out for her new family, then demanded college money for my siblings. When she found out I'm successful, I used to believe that family was something you could never lose. That was until the day I returned to the front door of the house that once belonged to me, only to realize I no longer had the key. It wasn't because I had lost it, but because someone had changed the lock. To them, I had never truly belonged there in the first place. My name is Naomi Rivers. I am 33 years old and currently an executive at a major tech company in New York, but I am not sharing this to brag. I say it so you can understand that some success does not come from inspiration, but from being abandoned. Some people do not grow up because they were nurtured. They grow up because they were pushed out of the place they once called home. I never had a father, or more accurately, he was never around long enough to become a real figure in my life. My mother gave birth to me when she was 20. They had only been dating for a few months when she found out she was pregnant, and he chose to walk away as if he had never existed. I used to think my mother was the strongest woman in the world for raising me on her own. But now I understand that some forms of strength are rooted in selfishness. Some of the hugs I received as a child were only temporary, before I became someone too inconvenient to keep around. I was raised by my maternal grandparents, the people I still believe were my true family. My mother was fortunate to have their constant support and encouragement. Because of that, she was able to finish school and secure a stable job. During my early years, she dated a few men. When I was around 8, she began a relationship with a coworker named Gregory. They dated for more than 3 years before getting married. Gregory and I were never particularly close, but we were polite enough to tolerate each other's presence under the same roof. 4 years after they got married, my mother became pregnant. Everyone was happy, including me. Looking back, I probably should have seen what was coming. But at the time, I was too caught up in the belief that my mother would always stand by me. I hoped she would never leave me behind, because she had gone through so much to raise me. What I didn't expect was that I would slowly be pushed out of the very picture I once believed we were painting together. After marrying Gregory, my mother gradually began to create distance between us. We started drifting apart, but I assumed it was just a temporary phase and that things would eventually go back to normal. During her pregnancy, I did everything I could to make her happy. But it seemed that every time I was around, she became more irritable. To avoid upsetting her, I started keeping to myself more. But apparently, I still wasn't invisible enough for her. I pulled back. I spoke less, stayed quieter, and cleaned more. I did everything I could to make things easier for my mother. But the more I tried, the more I felt like a piece of furniture in the house. Something that existed but wouldn't be missed if it was gone. When my 2 younger siblings were born, I thought things would become busier and more stressful, but at least I would no longer be seen as a nuisance. I believed that maybe being ignored was better than being snapped at. But I was wrong. One day, my mother and Gregory asked me to sit down for a serious talk. They said they could no longer keep me in the house because they had to focus on the 2 children. After that conversation, I started to retreat into myself. Not because I was angry, but because I was afraid that if I kept showing up, I would hear more things that I might never be able to forgive. I turned 16 in silence. No party, no cake, and not even a birthday wish from my mother. Legally, they couldn't throw me out since I was still a minor. So instead, they tried to convince me that the household was facing financial strain and that they couldn't support such a big family anymore. But our life had never felt lacking before. I didn't believe that feeding 2 adults, 1 teenager, and 2 children was beyond the income of 2 software engineers. It was clear to me that they simply wanted me gone. I really didn't want to leave. Even then, I tried to offer solutions. If money was the issue, I offered to take a part-time job. But my mother said she wanted to save their money and energy for the children who deserved it more. She made it clear that my siblings were more worthy of staying, not because they needed it more than I did, but because they were more deserving. That was the moment I realized I had lost. Not in an argument, but in a relationship I had once believed was unbreakable. The bond between a mother and daughter. I packed my suitcase and left the house on a drizzly afternoon. No one came to see me off. No one said goodbye. but I didn't cry. That pain had already emptied me of tears long ago. I went to my grandparents' home. They didn't ask many questions. My grandmother hugged me tightly and said, "There's always room for you here, no matter what the world outside looks like." Although they were deeply hurt by my mother's actions, they didn't completely cut ties with her. They still wanted to be present in the lives of the twins. I started what people would call my adult life with a backpack, a few sets of clothes, a worn-out notebook, and one childhood photo of myself. It was the only picture my mother had ever printed and displayed in the living room. The day I left, it had already been taken down. I found it in an old drawer, picked it up, and placed it in my bag. It served as a reminder that no one could take away my childhood, even if they tried to pretend it never happened. Living with my grandparents brought a sense of comfort, but I knew they were too old to take care of me all over again. My grandfather had chronic joint pain. My grandmother often felt tired, and her hands trembled when she poured water. I couldn't let them carry more than they already had. I needed to stand on my own 2 feet. I got a part-time job at a coffee shop about 3 blocks from their house. Every morning, I woke up at 5 a.m., helped my grandmother clean the kitchen, then walked to work. After each shift, I came home to study and review for exams. No one was pushing me, but no one was backing me up either. I understood very clearly that if I didn't try hard, no one would be there to catch me. I applied to college on my own. I wrote my own scholarship letters. I contacted student support offices myself. And when every hope of financial assistance seemed to run out, one of my uncles agreed to co-sign a student loan for me. I remember the day he signed it. He looked at me for a long time and said, "Your mother is stubborn. But don't let her stubbornness be the reason you don't succeed." I nodded, quietly and gratefully. Student life wasn't easy. While my friends received money from their parents, I picked up shifts at the library, waited tables at a diner on weekends, and occasionally tutored kids in the neighborhood. I lived in a small room that barely fit a single bed, a desk, and an old plastic wardrobe. Every night I lay on my back staring at the ceiling, wondering if my mother would be proud of me if she saw how hard I was trying. But she never called, not even once. Graduation day was bright and sunny. I walked across the stage holding my bachelor's degree, hearing the applause from the crowd. Among hundreds of people, I saw my grandparents. They smiled, waved, their eyes filled with tears. My mother wasn't there. To be honest, I had stopped expecting her to show up long ago. But there was a moment, just 1 second, when the MC read my name aloud and I instinctively turned around, as if I was hoping she might surprise me, standing there with a smile. Of course, there was no one. After the ceremony, I took photos with my grandparents. Then we had lunch at a small restaurant near campus. No candles, no wine, no cake. Just the 3 of us and a quiet sense of pride. I started working full-time right after graduation. My first job was as a data entry clerk at a small tech company. The salary wasn't high, but it was stable. I lived in a rented apartment that wasn't fancy, but it was clean. I paid for my own electricity, water, internet, and every installment of my student loan. Each payment felt like I was gradually erasing the burden my mother had left behind. I didn't go out partying. I didn't travel. I didn't have time for romance. I put everything into stabilizing my life. Partly because I wanted freedom, and partly because I didn't want to be a burden to anyone. 3 years later, I got promoted. Then another 3 years after that, I moved to a larger company, in a higher position. By the time I was 32, I had been promoted to director of operations. It was a leap that no one expected, except me. I didn't throw a party to celebrate. I simply called my uncle, the one who had co-signed my loan all those years ago, and said, "I made it, Uncle." He chuckled, voice trembling a little, and replied, "I never doubted you." I don't know how, but my mother found out. One afternoon, while I was gardening in front of the house, the doorbell rang. I opened it and froze. It was my mother and Gregory. I don't remember exactly what I said. Maybe it was an awkward greeting. Maybe just a faint, All I remember is the way she looked at me from head to toe. It wasn't the look of a mother reunited with her child, but the calculating glance of someone evaluating an investment. She said, "We need to talk." And that was when everything started to unravel. I'm not sure why I let them in. Maybe because I had once dreamed of a reunion where I would finally be acknowledged. Maybe because somewhere inside me, there was still that 16-year-old who once stood by the bedroom door waiting for an apology. Whatever the reason, I opened the door and they walked in. There were no hugs, no tears, just cautious footsteps on cold wooden floors, and a silence so thick it swallowed every remaining sound in the house. I poured them water. They didn't drink. The air felt heavy, not because of tension, but because the two people who had pushed me out of their lives were now sitting here as if nothing had ever happened. Gregory was the first to speak. His voice still sounded as soft as I remembered, but there was no warmth left in it for me. Their first words weren't an apology. They didn't ask how I was. They didn't say, "We were wrong." They started by bringing up the good news they'd heard from my uncle. I went still. I couldn't understand why my success was the first thing they chose to talk about. They didn't ask what I had been through. They didn't mention the past. They looked at my present with eyes full of calculation. I sat there in silence as they spoke about the hard years, the small business they tried and failed to run, the piling debts, and the two younger siblings who were now getting ready for college. And then I understood. They didn't come for me. They came for money. I barely reacted as they laid everything out. Their reasons sounded strangely familiar, echoing the same phrases they used when they pushed me out years ago. Back then, those words were used as weapons. Now, they were excuses to try and pull me back in, not as a daughter, but as someone they hoped could carry the burden. I remembered the feeling of being 16, standing in the living room with my hand gripping the strap of my backpack, hearing my mother say that my siblings deserved to stay more than I did. Now, those same words were being used again, but this time, they were trying to convince me to pay for their college tuition. I didn't get angry. I didn't cry. I just felt something quietly shut down inside me. I told them I wouldn't do it. Not because I hated my siblings, but because I wasn't close enough to them to feel anything specific. And more importantly, none of them had ever been there for me. Not when I was working multiple jobs, drowning in student debt, barely getting by. I had gone through all of that alone. No one called. No one sent a card. No one showed up at my graduation. And now, after I had finally stepped out of the darkness, they returned as if everything could be repaired with a few kind words. Then came their reaction. Instead of apologizing, they shifted the blame. They said I was being stubborn, that I should understand that parents aren't perfect, that because I was now successful, I should be more forgiving, that I was being petty for staying silent all these years. I didn't argue. I just sat there and listened, like a defendant on trial without a lawyer. No witnesses, only accusations for surviving. Then my mother brought up all the years she raised me alone. She talked about the sleepless nights, the sweat she poured into raising me. But she didn't mention the days she left me standing outside school because she was too busy dating. She didn't bring up the years I had to do my own homework, attend parent-teacher meetings alone, cook my own dinner because she never came home. She called it sacrifice. I called it responsibility. And when she no longer wanted to carry that responsibility, she handed it over to me by throwing me out of her life. Eventually, when I stood up and asked them to leave, everything got worse. My mother started crying. Not the kind of tears that come from pain, but the kind used to push guilt onto someone else. Gregory stayed quiet, avoiding my eyes. I could see the calculation in every step they took and the helplessness that followed when the plan didn't work. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt tired, exhausted, like I had just stepped out of an old dream I no longer wanted to return to. After the door closed behind them, I stood there for a long moment. Not to reflect, just to catch my breath. I had hoped, just once, that my mother had come for love. But the only thing she seemed to carry was greed. and the only thing she failed to see was that I was no longer the child who used to cry for her return. I was a survivor. And this time, I was the one who ended the final conversation. After that day, I thought everything was over. I believed that by firmly saying no and closing the door right in front of them, I had sent the final message. I was no longer the daughter they could push around, send away, or pull back at will. But I underestimated the persistence of someone who had spent her whole life manipulating emotions. 3 days later, I received the first email. It was from my mother, using a strange, unfamiliar address. The message was long and messy, a mix of begging, emotional blackmail, and dramatic storytelling. She brought up the years she raised me alone, emphasized that we're still blood, and said it was time I repaid part of the kindness. She called my success luck and claimed that if I didn't help, it meant I had forgotten where I came from. I didn't reply. I didn't delete it either. I just marked it as read and moved on. But it didn't stop there. Almost every other day, a new email would appear. Longer, more emotional, and more aggressive. Some parts were full of regret, others full of blame. Some were written to make me feel guilty for daring to live well without her permission. I blocked the address. She made a new one, and then another. It was a never-ending loop, as if she was trying to break back into my life through any crack she could find. I began to lose sleep. Every time my phone buzzed with a new message, my heart would race. I hated that feeling. I hated that someone who no longer had a place in my life could still affect my mental state that much. I knew that if I didn't take action, she wouldn't stop. Because to her, silence wasn't an end. It was an opportunity to keep going. A week later, she showed up at my office. I wasn't there that day. I had taken the day off because I wasn't feeling well and needed to rest. When the receptionist called to say a woman was insisting on seeing me and refusing to leave, I knew instantly who it was. I told them not to let her in. But she stayed out there for almost 30 more minutes and only left after I made it clear that if she ever came back again, I would involve the law. I didn't know what she hoped to achieve by showing up at my workplace. Was she trying to force me to come out? Embarrass me into giving in? Or maybe she just couldn't stand being completely shut out of my life. Whatever her reasons were, I knew this was no longer just a plea. It was a violation of boundaries, and I couldn't allow it to happen again. I went to see a lawyer. I brought every email message and a timeline of recent events. My attorney was a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a calm, understanding voice. She went through everything page by page, then nodded. She told me I had every right to file for a restraining order. There had been no physical violence yet, but the pattern of harassment, tracking, and emotional intimidation was serious enough. I hesitated. I had never imagined I would need the law to protect myself from my own mother. But then I asked myself, if I didn't do anything now, what would happen next? The answer came sooner than I expected. On a Thursday night, just after I left the gym, I saw someone standing at my front door. It was my mother. She stood there, shoulders trembling with anger, gripping her purse like she was ready to unleash everything still left inside her. I didn't say a word. I walked toward her, pulled out my phone, and got ready to call the police if I had to. But she didn't give me the chance. She lunged at me, pushed me down. My phone flew onto the pavement. She shouted at me, accusing me of destroying her family, of being the reason her life had fallen apart. I couldn't catch every word. My mind was spinning. I never thought she would go that far. I had seen her angry before, but never this completely out of control. Neighbors rushed out. One held her back, one helped me up. Someone called the police. I didn't cry. I was just shaking, breathing heavily but fully alert. When the police arrived, I calmly asked them to file a report and press charges. It was the hardest decision I had ever made, but also the most necessary. The day the restraining order was granted, I sat in my car staring at the piece of paper, feeling both a bit lighter and twice as heavy. I don't hate my mother, but I don't love her the same way anymore either. I just want her out of my life so she can't hurt me again. I heard from my uncle that Gregory had taken the twins to live with their paternal grandparents. He couldn't handle my mother's instability either. They argued, they yelled. It ended with him leaving, with no plans to come back. I don't know what else she's lost. But I do know the most painful thing she let go of was the right to be part of my life. I began planning to move. Somewhere bigger, somewhere quieter, somewhere I wouldn't feel afraid every time someone stood outside my door. I toured houses, reviewed finances, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was truly the one making the choices. I don't need anyone to forgive me for protecting myself. I don't owe anyone silence or tolerance. I've lived long enough in the dark. Now it's time I live in the light. Alone, but no longer lonely, I moved into my new home on a sunny Sunday morning. There was no special ceremony, no balloons, no relatives waiting at the door. Just me. A box of books, a small cactus, and a rental contract I had signed 2 weeks earlier. I placed the key in the lock, opened the door, stepped inside, and felt something inside me begin to settle. The house wasn't much bigger, but it was just enough for me to walk freely without tiptoeing, afraid of disturbing someone. Sunlight poured in through the kitchen window. There was a small balcony where I could grow a few flower pots and a workspace that I arranged myself, just the way I liked. Something I had never had before. No one asked if I needed anything. No one offered advice. No one interfered with how I chose to live. And for the first time, I realized that real freedom isn't just about walking away from someone. It's when your mind no longer gets pulled back to them every time you think about who you are. My mother never contacted me again after the trial. Maybe she was tired. Maybe she was ashamed. Or maybe she was simply looking for someone else to blame. Whatever the reason, I didn't care to know. I had stopped trying to understand her a long time ago. I no longer saw her as mom in the sense that a child still yearns to call someone mother without choking up. But I also no longer felt resentment. What remained was something quieter, a kind of compassion that no longer needed to be repaid. Someone once told me that forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves. At first, I thought it was just a cliche, but now I understand that forgiveness isn't about forgetting or accepting what happened. It's about no longer letting the past define your worth in the present. I still kept in touch with my grandparents. They were older and weaker, but they always asked whether I was eating well, sleeping okay, or if someone was treating me kindly. I used to think I didn't need anyone anymore. But it turns out, even the most fragile relationships can become an anchor, if you're willing to let them. I also met up with my uncle, the one who co-signed my student loan years ago. I invited him to dinner, and for the first time, I was the one paying. He refused, but I left the bill on the table anyway, along with a small card that read, "I'm still grateful." We didn't mention my mother. We both understood that some things don't need to be spoken out loud. It's enough to know we went through it, and came out whole. A few months later, I received a letter from Gregory. A handwritten note. Simple. Not long, not defensive. He said he had moved in with his parents to take care of the kids, that he no longer kept in contact with my mother, and that he was sorry. Not for kicking me out, but for staying silent for too long. I didn't know exactly how I felt reading that letter. A little hurt, a little relieved. Maybe it felt like closing the final chapter of a book I never thought I'd finish. I didn't reply. Not out of anger, but because I had nothing left to say. That letter had arrived too late, in a world I had already rebuilt for myself. I started journaling again after many years. Not to complain, but to hold on to the little things that reminded me I could still feel life. I didn't write to ease the pain. I wrote to recognize that I had made it through it. Today, I sit on the balcony of my new home, watching the late afternoon sun fall across the rooftops in the distance. No phone calls, no urgent messages, no long-winded emails from my mother. Just birdsong and the breeze brushing past the flower pots I had just planted. I feel peace. I don't know what the future will bring. I don't know if I'll ever love someone enough to build a family of my own. But one thing I do know for sure: I will never again let anyone tell me I am not enough. I was once left behind. But today, I'm the one who decides I will never go back to pick up the broken pieces someone else chose to drop. And if you're listening to this story and have ever felt like the one who was replaced, forgotten, or left out of the family picture, please remember this: you are not alone, and your story deserves to be told in your own voice. This is her side of the story, a place where those who've been pushed aside finally get to speak, a place where silence is replaced with truth, a place where you can begin again from yourself. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support our channel. See you in the next video.